Mark Cerny has actually talked about AMD Navi processors, working with Navi architecture. Basically, this is like the style of stuff that's going to be inside the next console. Well, this was not said at all by my source. I heard about things like possibly an AMD Radeon processor, things like possibly an AMD Radeon processor.
Who done stepped in the game? At point blank range. Who done stepped in the game? At point blank range. Who done stepped in the game? Stepped in the game. Stepped in the game.
Well, last night, I was actually contacted by a PlayStation employee who's currently playtesting the PS5, and they revealed a lot of very interesting details to me that I want to actually talk to you about today.
Okay, so I'll start first with the title. I talked to a PlayStation beta tester. How is that possible? The PlayStation 5 clearly, as dictated by the demo shown or the promise shown to Wired.com, Mark Cerny has said everything but the PlayStation 5 is in developmental phases. So games themselves can't really be worked out in a finalized process, which is what beta potentially means, after alpha, obviously. So now you're in the beta phase where you're getting ready to do the final release. You're preparing for the final release of your software. And in the case of hardware, it's the same way. You're getting ready to go gold and do mass production of this device. Well, for all intents and purposes, the PlayStation 5 dev kit, according to what Wired.com is talking about, is just a giant box. There's nothing really concrete or getting close to being finalized yet. As far as controllers or anything in that effect, the hardware itself is rapidly changing to the point where Mark Cerny couldn't give you a concrete answer as far as what type of CPU and what type of GPU would be in there. He would just only tell you what type of family. It would be the Ryzen type CPU, supposedly, and a next generation AMD GPU. Whether it's going to be Navi or not, it's still up in the air, because you can say Navi and then it's still going to end up being an embedded part. So what embedded processors are Navi capable that are going to be in this console? That kind of tickled my spidey senses there when I started hearing beta tester, and like, you can't be a PlayStation 5 beta tester because there's no beta hardware yet. And if it's a Sony employee that he was contacted by, they're under strict NDA, and as far as I know, to my knowledge, most beta testers, or most testers, play testers if you will, are contracted out specifically. There are very few actual first party testers with regards to that. Maybe they're like quality control, or they do the hiring of who the contractors are going to be coming in doing play testing of insert game here at Sony Studios. So I don't get how you can magically be contacted by somebody who will be heavily under NDAs. And why would they contact you? Why would they bring forth information? Exactly how did you come in contact with this person? Did you reach out to them, or did they reach out to you? If they reached out to you, chances are they're full of shit.
I want to just say, please consider this all as rumors right now. I was able to confirm this person's identity pretty concretely, and it seems like it's all completely legit, but there are just some things about it that are not 100% right. So just definitely take this with a huge grain of salt and think that maybe this is all crazy misinformation. But some of this stuff actually aligns pretty closely with some other leaks, and to me it gets me very, very excited.
Now, here's the quote-unquote disclaimer, because we're talking about rumors now. Now it's a rumor. But you verified this person. So if you verified this person, then you know who they are. Aren't you liable at this point, where if you know who this person is and they're leaking information, you verified that they work for Sony, what specifically? And how would they get in contact with you? And if that was the case, at this point right now, I'm just really wondering why a first-party playtester, if you will, that you could easily verify would contact you as a paid YouTuber. So there are other YouTubers out there that may have not saying that DreamCastGuy doesn't have a following, but there are other YouTubers out there with significant followings that I would say arguably have a bigger voice than even gaming media at this point. And if they haven't heard from a playtester or a leak or something to that effect at this point, it's a little bit dubious that you and only you magically got this information.
Now let's start off by talking a little bit about resolution. Now right now a lot of games are basically run at 720p or 1080p, but there has been talk about in the future maybe some consoles being able to actually hit 4K natively, or maybe even 8K natively. Now the reason I talk about this is because higher definition graphics are an interesting idea, but there's something that's definitely part of the future.
So this is the part that really frustrates me, because you start talking about resolution and then you talk about future consoles being able to output 4K natively. That's happening already right now with Xbox One X. The fact that you didn't even mention this lets me know that the information that you're about to give right now, you're not an expert on. And if you're not an expert on hardware information, why are you about to go down the list talking about hardware as if the information that he's giving you confirms whether or not it's relevant or that it excites you in some way? Because if you don't understand the tech, in what way would you be excited? You don't know what end result that's going to give you. And we're about to get there pretty quickly on how misinformed this guy is.
Right now, if you wanted to buy an 8K television, it's thousands and thousands of dollars. They're kind of an impossible idea right now, but they're definitely a part of the plan. Everything is going to end up looking photorealistic. Well, according to my source, some of the games they're testing right now, well, a lot of them are very, very early on, of course. There's not a complete PS5 game, but some of the stuff that they're actually running on there is actually hitting native 8K. This is a very, very big deal. Even if you're one of those gamers that's like, bro, I don't even care about graphics. It's still important because it means it's just basically a display of how strong this hardware actually is.
Okay, so he talks about 8K monitors and displays and whatnot being unreachable. While for the average person, it will require a loan of some sort. 15 grand is about what you expect for a high-end TV that's just at the tip of the cutting edge. So 4K several years ago was in the same realm. OLED 1080p TVs were the exact same way some years before that. So you should expect whatever the new hotness is, 3D TVs were as well, and curved displays, they're going to be anywhere between $9,000 to $15,000 at a minimum, and you'll see some that are stupidly expensive. I think I saw one earlier today that was $69,000. You're gonna get that. That should be expected, and technology is going to be that way going forward. So as soon as 8K displays are mainstream, 16K displays are going to be out, and they're going to be the same price range. So I don't even know why he even touches on that. I guess he wants to talk about the whole 8K thing. And when he started talking about games natively hitting 8K, that's kind of a trigger as well, because the first thing you want to do when you're developing a game is make sure the fucking game runs. So and play testers themselves don't verify resolution. That's something that the computer graphics engineer does, or the programmer does. They set that boundary internally during their project management meetings, and they decide whether or not they're going to do this or not. So a playtester, which means that the project is already underway and it's been approved, that's not a good source to tell you what your resolution is going to be, because they're just playing a game to look for bugs and then send the results back through their ITSM management system. And they'll say, hey, I found this bug in this area here. And then the debuggers or the coders will go look through debugging and finding out where the memory leak is in said software to resolve the issue. Playtesting hardware if there is a thing, I would imagine would be a comfort thing with regards to controllers and things like that, and debugging the actual hardware itself if there are any firmware issues and things like that. But that's stuff that mechanical engineers, electricians, and hardware programmers, the guys that assemble firmware, BIOSes, and individual ICs, they work on that type of stuff. That's not something that a tester would ever see or know. And with regards to resolution, again, where are these 8K monitors coming from to display this resolution? Yes, I know they would have that internally, but as a playtester, are you really giving that, or you're just giving the software and you're just playing it on whatever they have? Usually they're smaller computer monitors, and there's an entire, how can I say, it's not a warehouse, but just like a workshop that you test in. Now, there may be some high-end stuff, some studio type scenarios where they have the best case scenario and you test that. But even then, it's not like there's just going to be a running display of what your resolution is and what your frame rate is. Typically, that type of debugging, that information is for debugging. It's not for a tester. A tester just makes sure the game is not broken, and they find different ways to break the game so they can send those memory leak pieces of information to the developers so they can finish their game. And considering that the only demo that we know of right now is a port of Spider-Man to the, as of yet, unfinished development kit for the PlayStation 5, what bugs are we finding, really, for that particular piece of software? And because it's a finished game for the most part anyway, and you're just putting it on newer hardware, which essentially would be a PC port at this point. I don't think there's going to be a heavy investment with regards to testing the throughput of that game in 8K. Does the game run? Yes, it runs. Okay, we'll adjust the assets as such to perform in 8K. It's really not that big of a deal. Yes, there'll be playtesting after that just to affirm. But yeah, a playtester knowing the resolution period that's just really odd. Anyways.
So how are they able to hit this off? Well, it's only on certain games to start with. He was pretty clear to say that it's not going to be like giant open world games. If there's like dragons breathing fire on top of a castle and stuff, that's not going to be 8K. Instead, that stuff will be like a good strong 4K, but other things like racing games or corridor shooters, those things will actually be able to possibly hit 8K natively, and the way this is done is because it has 14 teraflops of CPU power inside it. This is a lot of computing.
And now we get to the funny parts. First of all, there's the assumption that open world games are somehow infinitely more demanding on hardware with regards to graphics per se. The vast majority of games released today that are open world are largely CPU bound, not GPU bound. So if the quote unquote graphics is there or the 8K visuals are there, whether it's open world or not doesn't determine whether the game can run in 4K or in 8K unless the CPU is shit. And then that means that the updates that it requests from the GPU, it takes more time to do that. So unless you're confirming that the PlayStation 5 has a below average CPU or is limited in memory in some way, shape, or form, which typically they are with regards to latency anyway, in that way, in shape, or form, that they haven't really been good on latency since the PlayStation 2. Yeah, I'm not really getting that one. Any moderate CPU at this point, as long as the GPU can push the pixels, it doesn't matter what type of engine it is. It doesn't matter if it's open world or a corridor shooter or what have you. And to talk about those games, kind of downplaying them and saying that those would be able to do 8K and others wouldn't, shows your lack of information on how these games are built to begin with. Just looking broadly at some terms that you hear or just some reviews that you hear from other people doesn't mean those people know what they're talking about. And this is the type of hive mind mentality that is the problem with the gaming industry and basically just in general how people behave. They take misinformation and they spread it to each other as information, and it creates this echo chamber of ignorance. It's crazy. 14 teraflops of CPU power. First of all, power is a term that's just hilarious to me because that usually means voltage, either DC or AC. What a lot of people confuse that with is performance. And since he's talking about CPU performance, since he said CPU power, CPUs don't do 14 teraflops. If there's anything that's going to be in the teraflop realm of floating point performance, if anybody knows what a teraflop is, or quote unquote, as Mr. T said, calls them titty flops, that is several millions of floating point operations per second, to the tune of trillion. So if you're doing 14 teraflops on the CPU, show me this CPU. Even the Xbox One and the famed PlayStation 4, they're around 100 gigaflops of floating point performance in those CPUs because they are very low-end, low-wattage CPUs. And chances are that's the way things are going. With GPUs becoming more heterogeneous in nature and CPUs knowing how to handle those tasks and pass the large SIMD instructions to the GPU so they can be processed there on the registers on the GPU and then pass that information back to the CPU. That's going to continue, and that was part of the reason why people were so confused about why the Wii U had the 3-core setup that it had, and why quote unquote there was weak SIMD instruction on it. Well, if you've got a GPU that basically does all that number crunching for you, why the fuck do you need it in your CPU? And as much as people thought that was a bad idea, here come the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One with enhanced Bobcat cores. These Jaguar cores, which are extremely low power and low in floating point performance, while it was a little bit above what the Wii U was doing, they did the exact same thing Wii U did. For anything that needed extreme floating point performance, that was sent off to the GPU and the shader, and the results were sent back. It was interpreted, and then you update the display. So. Yeah, you're not going to find a 14 teraflop CPU anywhere. And unless there are 20 plus CPUs inside of the PlayStation 5, that's not happening there either. So I don't know if this was some type of Freudian slip, or maybe he just decided to say CPU because he thought that was the word he was supposed to say. He meant GPU with regards to teraflops, because those are the only type of custom ASICs that are going to get you close to that type of floating point number. And even then, 14 teraflops, that's not going to come cheap. But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
To give you a little bit of perspective, keep in mind that the PlayStation 4 Pro has 4.2 teraflops. So this is like 3 times stronger, which is a pretty significant leap. Now, it's not as big as some people may think, simply because remember that the jump from 1080p to 4K is 4 times the resolution. Here's like an infographic to try and display that. It's a pretty big leap, so trying to go from 4K to 8K is another significant gap. This is partially assisted by the fact that the PS5 apparently has 16 gigabytes of RAM inside it. This is again not super shocking and is a good sign though. It's basically saying that this will be a very nice step up from current consoles, but not such a giant leap ahead that the consoles will possibly cost $600.
So, and this was his explanation. His explanation on saying why there are 14 teraflops in this supposed GPU was that because the jump from 1080p to 4K was 4x, which it typically is. But teraflops have nothing to do with that. That has everything to do with the rasterizer itself and how much video memory you have available. If you're gonna go from 1080p to 4K, you're gonna need anywhere between 6 to maybe 7 megabytes of frame buffer. Keyword megabytes, not gigabytes. And you only need around 8 per frame to display 8K. So this is the type of misinformation we're talking about here. So you need some type of video memory that you're constantly going to have as your refresh, that you're going to need to update every page. So anyway, if you have anywhere between 32 megs of VRAM, you can up the display any number of times. You can natively display 16K with 32 megs of VRAM. Now that sounds like, well, how can you do that with just because I'm looking at these PCs? Well, there's a little bit more to that. So in addition to updating the frame buffer, you also have all the values for all your render targets that are going to be in every scene. So all your textures and the cost of the polygons themselves being transformed, a couple of megabytes per, however many 100,000. That's going to determine how many pixels are on screen per polygon, the pixel depth of your display, whether it's going to be 16, 24, or 32-bit color, and whether or not you're going to actually use 8K textures in your game. Because who gives a shit if you can do 8K with those 32 megs of memory? Well, actually 8 megs is what you really need. If you have those 8 megs of memory and you can update the display to 8K, who cares if you don't have enough memory to do your 8192 by 8192 texture format? Because that means that you're going to have character models on screen with low resolution textures shown on a 8K image, and that's going to look really muddy. Think N64 with 32 by 32 texture sets, and you'll start to see what we're talking about with really chunky type stuff. So that's where the whole memory thing comes in, and he starts to talk about 16 gigs of RAM, because you'll need to update that. You need that type of memory for your render target. So if you've got stuff on the scene and you've got 8K textures and whatnot, you're going to need that amount of memory per frame to be able to display that type of stuff. And obviously, developers over the years have learned certain tricks and ways to do high resolution texture sets, 4K and even 8K, by doing different routines like dividing the textures every other frame, things of that nature, to change up the seams and the banding of the texels that are going to be shown on screen for that individual texture. And also multi-layering or multi-texturing, which started in the 6th generation of consoles, is another way to kind of get around it. I just don't get exactly why he's confusing all these things together. We're talking about native 8K at this point, and we can't even discern whether or not it's teraflops or it's RAM that's giving you this ability to provide this display that you're talking about. If we're gonna what are we doing?
Something that was said again and again during my talks with this person is that cost was definitely on the table. It seems like they're trying to do everything as cheaply as possible, and also it seems like they're trying to cut a lot of special deals with a lot of these companies to make sure when they get the parts, they can get them for just pennies, to try and get them for the lowest cost. That way the console itself isn't going to be like $500 or $800, because let's face it, nobody's buying an $800 PS5.
Welcome to how every console has been made since the beginning. You get a design win for whatever you need for the SoC that you're going to put in your console, and you broker a deal for a lot of revenue, but at a lower cost per thousand as you buy all these orders in bulk for your SoC and the plastic and all the other metals that you would need to build the system. This is nothing new. Why he's mentioning this about the PlayStation 5 is if it's not every other single console that's ever been on the market, to include all the ones that failed. I don't know, but let's continue.
An SSD. Well, this has now been confirmed by my source. But what's funny is that the prototype PS5s, and there's actually multiple versions of it, all of them are running with 256 gigabytes of solid state memory just to try and save cash right now.
That's the other thing that's hilarious here. He said that solid state drives were confirmed by his source. No, they weren't. They were confirmed by Mark Cerny. He already said that. When he did the Wired interview and had them come visit, that was exactly what he was talking about and why they were able to have the fast load times. They dump everything from RAM to SSD or dump everything from SSD to RAM, and you're able to see the fast update to the point where you can just infinitely go into the distance in this open world Spider-Man demo with very little cost to refresh or waiting on the display to load. If it's all in RAM, it's pretty easy to do. You've seen implementations of this before in other open world games. One of my favorites is Xenoblade Chronicles X. If the whole game fits in 1 gig of RAM, then fuck it. You don't have to worry about seeing shit update or waiting on stuff to load unless you fast travel or something in that effect. They've taken a more extreme effect where it looks like you're fast traveling because everything's in RAM and there's so much RAM available that it's loading super fast. So why he's talking about SSDs like he's the person that confirmed it, like no. Before you even talked to this dude and made this video, pretty much anybody that's been following the PlayStation 5 knew that this Wired interview happened. And they were talking about solid state drives then, flash memory. That's something that Nintendo has been doing since Wii. So yeah, like thank you for finally joining us where we were already. I don't get it. The amount of rambling here is astonishing. If you're gonna be an expert on this type of stuff, and if you're gonna be quote unquote leaking it, and it's exclusive information, the only thing exclusive that you've mentioned so far are falsehoods. Everything else that's quote unquote been confirmed has already been confirmed in an interview.
Now let's talk for a second about those multiple prototypes, because this is perhaps where the information gets the most confusing from public notes, other leaks, and what this means right now.
Okay, so you mentioned, this is the issue that I'm having here. The title of this video states that you talked to a PlayStation beta tester, and you're talking about multiple prototypes. Multiple prototypes are before the alpha phase. And you're talking about beta? Beta is prior to release, like fairly soon. There's no, you're confusing so many different pieces of terminology here. No wonder people were skeptical for you releasing this video. So either there are multiple prototypes, and this is in a pre-alpha phase, or you talk to a beta tester who wasn't a beta tester because the hardware nor the games are in a beta phase right now. Which one is it? My bet is on the former.
So something we've actually seen in the news here and there is the fact that Mark Cerny, he's actually the guy who's the head of the PlayStation 4 development and now the head of the, basically the engineering and development team of the PlayStation 5. Mark Cerny has actually talked about AMD Navi processors, working with Navi architecture. Basically, this is like the style of stuff that's going to be inside the next console. Well, this was not said at all by my source.
Navi is not a style of stuff that's inside the next console. Navi is a GPU architecture. A completely different design from GCN, which previous consoles used before. So this is where reading and gathering links together and not understanding any of it has you looking like you're babbling. That's exactly what happens here. It's very frustrating. Very frustrating. I don't know how I even made it through this video the first time I watched it.
I heard about things like possibly an AMD Radeon processor. I've heard a lot of stuff about different CPUs and GPUs being put in this, but the main console he was talking to me about actually had NVIDIA tech in it. Now, this is all being based on hardcore stuff that's already on store shelves. Now, I'm using the thing based on because nothing in consoles is ever just straight off the store shelves and put in your console. It's always customized to some degree, mostly because they want to try and make it affordable, but also because they want to make sure that every piece of it perfectly integrates together. Well, in this, the NVIDIA tech is actually based on, let me read it off here, the GTX 660. So the 660 technology that's coming out now, that's sort of being talked about, that's what it's in. This is strong stuff, but not mind-blowing stuff. Basically, a lot of this tech stuff makes me think that this is going to be a nice leap above, but not crazy impossible.
Again, more babbling. So, before I get to what got more people upset about this video, there's one thing that I don't think anybody caught, and of course ReviewTechUSA wouldn't catch anything like this because he's not a technical person either, which I'll talk about that in a little bit too towards the end of this video. Right after him saying there was no Navi architecture mentioned when talking about the different prototypes for the PlayStation 5, right after that, he said that he heard that Radeon technology would be in it. Navi is a Radeon product. AMD Radeon. That is what they named their products. Navi is just a code name for the architecture that it's going to use. It would be branded as a Radeon card. What in the fuck, man? And there are several thousand followers for this individual. Several thousand. Anyways, and so the main issue here is the GTX 660, which he flubbed because he meant to say 1660, which he actually put in the text of the video as he was editing it. He's talking about NVIDIA tech being here, and in no way, shape, or form did Sony ever mention anything about NVIDIA technology being in the PlayStation 5. As a matter of fact, they knew it wasn't going to be because it was of grave importance that the PlayStation 5 be backwards compatible with the PlayStation 4. Now, while I am certain that shaders are shaders, and at the end of the day, on the graphics side of things, it really doesn't matter what kind of GPU you have as long as the CPU logic is the same, and you can kind of reinterpret the shaders and the visuals and whatnot going from Radeon type to NVIDIA type. So you can go from CUDA to shader and go back and forth between the other, as long as, because it's just multiply adds. You're just changing the values to understand what type of hardware they're running on. But with that being said, the CPU inside the PlayStation 4 is a AMD Jaguar core, or 2 sets of AMD Jaguar cores. How can you be backwards compatible in understanding that logic without using virtualization and end up using NVIDIA tech? So you have an NVIDIA GPU and an AMD APU as a CPU? Come on, man. I don't, that doesn't add up at all. So even if Sony was exploring at some point using NVIDIA tech before they made the pledge to use backwards compatibility in the PlayStation 5, it still is kind of sketchy, because the NVIDIA GTX 1660 is talking about is nowhere near 14 teraflops. Not at all. If we're going to start talking about teraflops, I can give you some listings of things that are not even close to that. So right now, a Titan RTX is supposedly the highest end GPU. And we're talking, or the Titan 5 CEO edition. The GeForce RTX 2080, which is really up there, has the highest has the highest pass mark score. And for obvious reasons, because that GPU is really is loaded with fucking cores. So right now, if you want 14 teraflops of performance, you're either going with a Tesla V100, which is right at 14 teraflops of single precision, right then and there. And you've got the Titan V CEO edition. And these are expensive cars, like extremely expensive cars. So you're talking well over anywhere between $1,700 to $2,000 for this one singular GPU. Yeah. And these are GV100 process types, and that's 13.8 teraflops and 14 even for the Tesla V100, and that's Volta. Yeah, so for 14 teraflops of performance, you're talking about a $2,000 card or a $10,000 card, depending on what NVIDIA did for them. And a shitload of shader cores, apparently, over 5,000 shaders. So, or CUDA cores, however you want to pronounce them. There's no way anything like that is going to be inside of a PlayStation 5 unless it's a giant box. And with regards to that being embedded, the only thing you could do is have dual GPUs. So half of this, so maybe a Titan 5 with half the amount of shader cores, and you have two of them on board, maybe that'll work. But even then, extreme cooling measures need to be happening.
I know a lot of people, when it comes to the next console generation, there's always the talk about how is this going to compare to PC gaming. A lot of times whenever there's like that next huge thing coming over the horizon, a lot of people compare it to current high-end PCs because those are obviously creating the best graphics, the best visuals, the most instantaneous load times. So people are saying, okay, compared to like a $3,000 supercomputer, where does this measure up? And in my opinion, just by looking at a lot of these notes and what my source was telling me, it seems like they are measuring up in an actual practical manner. This is not going to be reinventing the wheel. This is not going to be impossible freaking crazy graphics that make your eyes bleed.
So it's not going to compete with a high-end CPU. It's not going to make your eyes bleed per se, but you're talking about 14 fucking teraflops. That is literally the cutting edge and the most expensive GPUs that are out there. To the point where the only way that the Titan V was available is because they were given out.
As you heard me mention earlier, there are no PlayStation 5 games. I mean, how are you actually going to test PS5 hardware if you don't have PS5 stuff, right? I mean, there's no PS5 games that are done, or most of them are in pre-alpha stages from what I've heard, so it's not like they're able to, like, pick up a controller and run around in these environments.
So again, we get more confusion. Pre-alpha games, but you talk to a beta tester. Pre-alpha games, but you talk to a beta tester. Misinformation.
Well, it sounds like the main thing that they're doing right now is taking like the code of PlayStation 4 games and putting it into a PlayStation 5 system and then using that dev kit to run around and see how it works. How much they can actually improve current experiences. That's why you're seeing things like that video that came out of Spider-Man on PS4 loading in less than a second. This is kind of what they're having to do right now to experiment to make sure that A, all those games will run perfectly, and B, that the PlayStation 5 hardware is a nice leap up. Now, I do want to say all of this is still just a rumor. It is not confirmed, but from what my source was saying, it seems like it is very nicely along in the process.
So guys, I really think that I don't know anything about the PlayStation 5, but let me talk to you guys about the PlayStation 5. Let me tell you how I know nothing about the PlayStation 5 and confuse teraflops on CPUs and GPUs and not talk about shader counts at all, which gives you the teraflops that I say is possible inside the PlayStation 5, but only exists today in $2,000 to $10,000 GPUs. So of course, dear followers, you know that there was major backlash after he released this video. Yeah, so obviously he had to walk it back, and I found it oddly convenient that not only did he do an apology video after delisting the vid, but he also got somebody else to defend him and make their own vid with a significant amount of followers. It's just really, really interesting how that happened. And that person is supposedly a tech head themselves, and they supposedly make those same mistakes. But I'll get into that in just a second.
Whether it be you discussing news or reviewing a product, there's always this subconscious or just necessary element of being first. Okay, whether you find out leaked information, whether you get a product first from a major release, like say you're one of the first people that you have a contact over at Sony, you get your hands on the PS5 after it's released or a month before it's released, and they're telling you no NDA, you can review it.
Now that's a horrible defense, and I'm going to tell you why. Being first when you're talking about technology and putting out information that supposedly is prefaces other individuals, the whole point is getting it right, or at least understanding the information that you're given. Why talk about a car that has yet to have been released if you don't even know how a gasoline engine works? Why talk about a brand new dish that comes out if you've never even cooked a meal before? Why talk about any type of technology if you have no idea how it works? The gaming industry is a little bit more than just, hey, I watch this YouTuber and I watch this YouTuber, or I listen to IGN and I listen to GameSpot, and the buzzwords that they throw around, I'm going to throw those around too. It doesn't work that way. You have to fucking understand what you're talking about. And he doesn't. The guy that's defending him, ReviewTechUSA, he doesn't either. I followed him for a very long time, and I came to that conclusion a long time ago. I literally only watched his content to see if he got any better. For the most part, he hasn't. I just found it odd that as soon as DreamCastGuy placed this retraction video, here comes this defense video from ReviewTechUSA. This is the same guy where if you comment on a video or at him on social media, never responds. Especially if it's talking about technology, it's stuff that he loves so much. He's not going to get into a deep discussion about it. And if he's going to be on a podcast with somebody talking about it, it's usually an agreeance accord. Like, they just listening to him talk. It's not a, well, let's talk about this and let's talk about why do you feel that way? What process got you to thinking about this? You said the Switch and the Wii U have paltry storage. Well, why do you feel that way if Switch and Wii U don't have to install games like Xbox One and PlayStation 4 do? That discussion never happened on any podcast. Not to my knowledge, not from any ones that I watched. And any time that he was asked, either in a comment or any other type of thread or whatnot, he completely ghosts the situation. So, yeah, I found it odd that type of defense was happening. But at the same point in time, it's not surprising. Considering they both have significant subscriber counts, they kind of both run in the same circles, and like he mentioned before, they both make the same type of content for the most part. The same type of, let me stand in front of this camera, let me sit in front of this camera, and not really getting into details, just kind of like, well, this happened and I'm just going to talk about it because this is what I heard before. I'm going to regurgitate it and give it to you. And that's interesting that there are other people that do those kind of takes and whatnot, but then there are other people that are committed to giving accurate information and the truth. And I just really feel that in this type of realm, that should be first and foremost what you do. You shouldn't just say, I don't think this game can run because you don't think it can run. You should be able to say why. And if you can't say why should anybody believe you? If you can't even give any type of reason other than a comparison of two games that are completely different or two platforms that are completely different. I just, well, my distrust of ReviewTechUSA goes a long way back, so I'll just leave that alone. But yeah, interesting turn of events and how that kind of went out. But yeah, ladies and gents, watch your feed, watch who you subscribe to, pay attention to them. If you prefer to have opinionated takes, sure, go for it. Just know what else comes with that. Do you play games to have fun or to impress other people?